Good morning. Please find your seats because we are about to begin. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're ready for a wonderful start. End of one phase of this conference and the beginning of another. Please welcome Ms. Rhonda Lauer, President and Chief Executive Officer of Foundations.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying themselves and really learning and having a great time and meeting some wonderful people. We have an action-packed agenda today and tomorrow and tonight, so I hope you got a little rest. This gives me great pleasure to introduce someone to you. About 6 months before he became mayor in the city, Jim Kenney, who you heard from the other day, said to me, Rhonda, I know you'll tell me the truth and I know you'll be 100% honest because you moved to New Jersey. So I said, Jim, you know, I'll be honest anyway. He said, what does a really great chief education officer look like? And I said, Jim, don't make a mistake on this one. I said, because this is too important. Get someone who has been there, who has done it, who understands, not just says, I work with parents, but someone who we know really works with parents and kids and families and community organizations. Get someone who has worked with health organizations, with hospitals to benefit kids. I said, let's look for someone like that. And I have to tell you, I had the privilege and the pleasure. First of all, I knew the background of this person. He wasn't the first person that came to my mind because I didn't know him that well, but I knew about him. And then I had the pleasure of doing a listening tour with Ann Gemmell and Otis Hackney. And then I spoke to parents of the kids in his school. He was a teacher at Germantown High School, a math teacher, and then he was asked to go to South Philadelphia High School, one of our toughest high schools in Philadelphia, to turn it around. And I am here to say that I actually saw it before and I saw it afterwards. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who has now been in charge of community schools in Philadelphia. There are now 12 community schools in Philadelphia, and who has opened up 2,000 additional spaces for our pre-K children. And with that, I present you the Chief Education Officer for the City of Philadelphia, my friend, Otis Hackney.
Man, good morning. I never heard that story before. So now I'm like all thrown off. I had to grow more of a beard because folks didn't realize I have 20 years in education to look a little older. And so just thank you very much for being here. I'm trying to look for somewhere to put my notes, sorry. Thank you very much, and welcome to the City of Philadelphia. It is a great pleasure and honor to stand before you today. And Rhonda, thank you for that awesome introduction. When I think about, Rhonda, you just saw us standing next to each other, and I might be a little bit bigger than her, but I'm not going to wrestle with her at all. When she asked me to do this, it was just like when, where, just tell me where to be, and I will be there. Because, like I said, I'm not even going to take on that challenge. So thank you very much for allowing me to, just open up today's event. And I was sitting there thinking about this summer and where I was 20 years ago. I was preparing to walk into my first classroom. So when you talked about Germantown and teaching at Germantown High School, getting ready and thinking like, oh my God, what am I going to do when I get, 5 classes, and at the time I didn't know what I was going to get, but, 5 classes of students, and am I ready? Am I ready? Do I know what I'm doing? Am I prepared? Do I know my content? Do I understand my craft? Do I know how to build, do I know how to care for the children that I have? And do I know how to build a sense of community in the classroom? And I went through, and what I just said, I went through, and I call those were like my 4 C's to success in terms of the work that I did as a teacher. It's just understanding my craft, understanding my content, caring for children, and building community in the classroom. I did not realize that that would transport me from the last classroom at the back of the hallway to now sitting in the mayor's cabinet as the chief education officer for the city of Philadelphia. So I have a crazy job, and so before this I was a principal, and when I think about now, most folks don't get to jump from a principal level straight to the cabinet, so it's a steep learning curve. Having the ability to not just only to read, but be able to read to learn was very helpful for me. Thank you, as I made that transition, because I had a lot of work to do. And so it's really exciting being able to lead the mayor's initiatives when he was talking about it on the campaign during that time about, I want to do community schools, about some things that this guy, Otis Hackney, is doing down at South Philadelphia High School. We want to expand quality pre-K seats across the city because we know in order for you all to do the work that you're doing, we need to set the table. Someone needs to set the table for children and for learning, so that way when they walk into that K3 space, that they're ready. They're at a level where they're ready to engage language and engage learning in each other, and start to understand this process of school and why education is so important. And we did it, and I know the mayor was here the other day, and he probably bragged about our controversial beverage tax, which we just, I heard he was really, really good. I was back in a bunker trying to figure out how we're going to spend it now. And everything, but just thinking about, that we were able to move the city in a direction that says that, no, it's important enough to figure out how we're going to fund these initiatives so we can expand these programs across the city. So it's just really, really exciting to do that work. So for those of you, depending on what level, where you are, so if you're still in the classroom as a teacher to a principal, just keep building on that, because there's no way I would have thought that before I even knew what a community school was and doing that work at South Philadelphia High School, that I would actually get the opportunity to lead an initiative to do them across the city. So for those of you that are, like I said, still in your building or in your organization, follow your passion, do what's right for kids, because you don't know what opportunities it can create. And I stand before you as an example. That's no way in this world I thought that I would be doing something like this. So it's just, once again, a pleasure and honor to be here. So it's an exciting time to do this work for us. The school district also, another thing the mayor put on me was like, Otis, by the way, we're going to do this thing called local control. Whew. So the school district of Philadelphia was under state control for 17 years. And that was something that we just had the first local school board meeting on July 9th, and 17 years. And so that was another initiative that we had to do. And so when I think about how we are bringing, the city and the school district and educators closer together, it's just a really exciting time for us. The school district, their test scores and their attendance rates are increasing, and we just want to make sure that we're helping to support that work. And as we mentioned, we have 12 community schools that are, places where we want students to thrive for our students and communities, and to come together and learn and make sure that we expand that initiative. PHL Pre-K, as we call it, right now is the city's free quality pre-K program, which we already serve 2,000 students, and right now we're in the midst of doing enrollment for the upcoming school year, where I got an update from my pre-K director yesterday. We're at 75%, and we're still in June in terms of enrollment, and those of you that know anything about enrolling children in pre-K, for us to be at 75%, we are doing an awesome job. Thank you. And my pre-K director, God bless her heart, she's like due to have a baby in September, and she's just like, but you're relentless, you won't let up. I'm like, you're here, we gotta work. But let's work on your transition plan, because I know that I'm gonna have more work real soon. She just understanding that it's keeping the pressure on so that way we can make sure that we deliver and have, 100% enrollment. So we had 100% enrollment last year, and so our goal is to do that. And hopefully with the new news that we had just recently from the state Supreme Court, we can expand. We're trying to see if we can do it this year. It's kind of late in the process to try to expand, but we're looking at to see if there's some opportunities to do that for this year. So it's really exciting. When we think about then, and I did see her on the way in, another woman, when I stand next to her, I might be a little bit bigger and stronger than her, but there's another person that I won't wrestle with, and I know you've spoken with or seen her, is Jenny Bergoni. I don't know where she is. I saw her this morning. There she is in the back. Jenny, hi, how you doing? It is great working with you, and you are another one. I am not going to tangle with you. When you asked me to be, Jenny asked me to be somewhere, I'll do my best to be there. And we have several people in my office that sit in different committees with the Read by Fourth work because it's so important. And so we want to make sure that that partnership is strong. Also in my office, we have we call Philly Reading Coaches, one of the city's newest initiatives, which pairs volunteers with K through 3 students for 1 hour reading, and expanding from 100 in the pilot phase to 500 volunteers with the program launched this summer. So between Read by 4, Philly Reading Coaches, and all the other work that's happening, it's imperative that we do this. And Rhonda mentioned that I was a math teacher, and I was talking to my staff yesterday about today, and I said to them, I said, when I was a teacher, I taught math, and one of the greatest skills is, for students to be really good math students is the ability to read. I said, students that read have high literacy levels. When I'm talking about algebra and getting them to transfer, language and, English to algebraic expression, it makes sense to them because they understand language, they understand structure, they understand what's supposed to happen. But the other piece that when I mentioned to them and instruct them, it was just, I said, but in every test is a reading test. I said almost every test that a student takes in school is a reading test. You have to read your directions. And so at South Philadelphia High School, I had more than 20-something% ELL students. Every test for them is a reading test, every single one of them. So how do we make sure that we're providing students, preparing students to be successful, not just in the area of literacy, but in their other subject areas as well? You all know that. I'm preaching to the choir today, but it's just a highlight in terms of how I think about the importance of literacy as much as I value my numbers. So the other thing that we focus on, especially with the community schools, and I know you're going to hear a lot more today from some experts, is around the impacts of trauma and how that impacts a child's learning. I mean, I have some notes here, and I could have a glasses off moment like the mayor, but then I won't be able to see you. I'm not like him. So I'll keep mine on. But as a young person who grew up in the city of Philadelphia, I grew up in West Philly on 56th Street. Those of you, if you're not from Philly, you have no idea where that is. It's an area right now, my parents still live there, and it's just still a rough part of town. If I go, 4 blocks in either direction or in that radius, there's a lot of violence that's still taking place in the neighborhood where I grew up. And thinking about the impacts of trauma and understanding what it does for a child's learning. People ask me as a principal, as a teacher, they said, what is your number one priority as a principal? I said, my number one priority as a principal is to create a safe environment. That's number one. People say, oh, it's learning. I said, because you can't learn in an unsafe environment. I said, that's it. I said, that's next. It's right below it. I said, but the first thing you have to do is to create a safe environment. And we know that our children that are regularly impacted by trauma, that it hurts them. The example that I give people all the time is just like ask a kid who has the bully standing in the door saying, I'll see you at 3 o'clock. Ask them how much learning that child is going to get sitting there like, oh my God, I don't want the school day to end, I'm scared. Or for some children, the bully is at home. I don't want the school day to end because I don't want to go home. Or I don't want to walk through my neighborhood, or whatever it is. That child is thinking more about their safety, more so than anything, and I don't care how good you are as an educator, they're thinking about that. So how do we address those issues? So that's why we do community schools. That's why we think about with our pre-K work, how do we also, a big component of the pre-K work is engaging parents and talking to them about trauma. How do you reduce the trauma or stresses in their home? Because some things you can't control. You may not be able to control your neighborhood, but at least can you control some of the things that are impacting your children and the home? And how do we address those issues in the classroom. So I'm just really looking forward to, hearing what's going to be shared today and learning more and getting feedback from those of you, especially in the region, and saying, Otis, these are the things that we would like to see in community schools. This is the work that we would like to see. So it's very important in understanding that. So the future of education, though, for Philadelphia is very bright. It's an exciting time. We're excited about what's happening here. I have a great boss. It is great that I have a boss who is known as the education mayor, and I get to be the chief education officer of the city. It is really, really, really exciting to do that. And so to be here today with you and to feel your energy and the spirit of your work and understand how fertile the ground is in Philadelphia for this work. So I know we have national funders here, local funders here, investing in our children. If you're here, you know that already. But it's getting others as well that are not here to say, no, what, Philadelphia is a great place to do this work because there's some exciting things going on. So just enjoy our city, get a cheesesteak, buy some sodas while you're here, please. Please, buy a soda or two, or any sugar-sweetened beverage to support our economy. Put another, every time you hear a soda open, a child gets a seat. Just think about it that way. I think I can end on that note. Is Siobhan here yet? All right, I'm passing it back to Rhonda. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.
Before we pass the mic back to Rhonda, I would like to welcome to the stage Kia Branson-Davis, who's the Corporate Relations Manager for Pico Energy, and invite Ralph Smith to join her.
Good morning, everyone. As it was just said, I'm Kia Branson-Davis, Corporate Relations Manager for PICO, and I am so happy to be here. I just recently completed my dissertation, actually, and earned my, thank you, earned an EDD in Educational Leadership and Administration. So, yes, so being here, it really means a lot just to hear what's going on in this wonderful city of mine, because I'm a native Philadelphian, and to hear about the wonderful things that are going on with literacy and reading, because it means so much. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the wonderful teachers that I've had throughout my public schooling here in Philadelphia. And it was great to hear a couple of days ago, Ralph mentioned how much it meant to him as a native Philadelphian to see the GLR message on the crown lights in Philadelphia. So if you're a Philadelphian and you know anything about this city, one of the most iconic images is our building, the PICO building. So I like the crown lights so much, I worked there. But in honor of this wonderful event, this wonderful conference, and in recognition of Ralph's fondness for the crown lights. Come on up, Ralph. And it's wonderful that this event is here in Philadelphia, putting a highlight on the fabulous work that's happening in education in Philadelphia, putting a national spotlight on what we're doing here. And with the Read by Fourth initiative and all of the wonderful things that are happening in communities throughout Philadelphia, wherever people are, from barbershops to supermarkets, there are book nooks and wonderful opportunities for people to engage in literacy and reading. So with all of that, I wanted to present the crown lights photo for both you, Ralph, and you, Jenny. So now, it's not, you are so welcome. It's not just a temporary thing that you have to see just when it's scheduled on the crown lights. Now you can have it all year round.
This is every day.
Yes, every day. So thank you. Thank you.
And now, Ms. Rhonda Lauer.
And now, Dr. Dana Long will introduce our speaker. Dr. Dana Long.
Good morning, everyone. Who is so excited for the next talk? I think this is really why we all came here. I mean, we all came here for Ralph, obviously, but Dr. Burke Harris is, she gives Ralph a run for his money, I think. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. And after knowing Dr. Burke Harris for, gosh, I don't even know how many years now, I have to tell you that she is a revolutionary, she's an illuminary, and she is leading us to change the way that we think about children and families forever in this country. So Dr. Burke Harris is the CEO and founder of the Center for Youth Wellness that's based out of San Francisco, California, but the changes she's making are spanning the country and the globe. She has brought the science behind early childhood adversity to light in the public arena so that we no longer are asking ourselves, what is wrong with this child, but what is happening to this child? Dr. Burke Harris's TED Talk has been viewed more than 4 million times. She is changing the dialogues in medicine, in health, in social sciences, even within our policymakers. She's been featured in many books, including in The New Yorker, in Paul Tufts' best-selling book, How Children Succeed, Great Curiosity and the Hidden Power of Character. She's been a movie star. She's been in the movie Resilience by Jamie Redford, and she was also in the movie that we were fortunate enough to preview here on Tuesday night, Broken Places, and we all know how powerful that film was. She herself has become an author and wrote an amazing book, which some of you are fortunate enough to have her sign after her keynote, called The Deepest Well, Healing and the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity. The amount of awards that Dr. Burke Harris has won are too many for me to list, but they include the Arnold G. Gold Foundation Humanitarianism Award in Medicine, as well as the Heinz Award for the Human Condition. She is an advisor to many huge initiatives, including Too Small to Fail, and is an active part of the leadership of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Everybody, please join me in welcoming Dr. Nadine Burke Harris.
Dana didn't mention dear friend, colleague, and partner to Dr. Dana Long. We work very closely together on the Bay Area Research Consortium on Toxic Stress. Thank you so much, Dana, for that very generous introduction. And thank you so much to all of you for having me here today, and particularly to Ralph for inviting me. Ralph, where are you? I can't see you. Anyways, and I want to start. So I'm going to be talking about childhood adversity, adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, and health and learning. And I want to just start by like a quick show of hands. How many folks are familiar with the term adverse childhood experiences? Woo! I love that. And how many folks feel familiar with the term toxic stress? Okay, fantastic. So I'll go through that part of my talk really briefly, and we can spend more of our time thinking and talking about solutions. So this work has been my joy and my passion for over a decade now when I opened a clinic in Bayview Hunters Point in 2007. And Bayview Hunters Point is a neighborhood in San Francisco. It's one of San Francisco's poorest and most underserved neighborhoods. And it's a place where at the time we opened the clinic, unlike the other neighborhoods in San Francisco where the leading cause of death was, heart disease, which was for most of the neighborhoods, or HIV/AIDS, as it was in 2 neighborhoods. The leading cause of death in Bayview Hunters Point at the time we opened the clinic was violence. That was the #1 cause of premature mortality. And so when I opened a clinic with the focus of addressing health disparities in this vulnerable community, it wasn't long before I started noticing a disturbing trend. So patient after patient was being referred to me for ADHD, right? Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And they were being referred to me by very concerned teachers and principals and people who were running after school programs. And they were saying, Dr. Burke, and this was before I was married. So, Dr. Burke, can you see Bobby? Bobby's hitting the kid next to him. He's falling out in class. He can't pay attention. He's not learning, Dr. Burke. Please, he's got ADHD. Can you put him on some Ritalin? And so I said, go ahead, come on, send him down. And when I did what I was trained to do, when I did a thorough history and physical exam, what I found was that for most of my patients, I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD. And the reason is because that history part of the history and physical, what I was hearing was that for most of my kids, they were being exposed to incredibly high doses of adversity. They were witnessing violence at home or in the community, or living with a parent who was struggling with mental illness or substance dependence. And the funny thing about it was, it wasn't just their behavior. I will never forget the 10-year-old girl that I saw, who I was seeing now again for another visit for asthma. This is a girl, she had severe asthma. I had been putting her on some powerful medications to try and keep her out of the hospital. And as I sat down again with her and her mom, I said, okay, well, let's go over your asthma triggers, right? Could it be pollen? Could it be pet dander? Could it be cockroaches? Could it be cleaning products? And we were going through, what is it that we didn't think of? And I'll never forget what this mom said to me. She said, Doctora, I noticed that my daughter's asthma tends to act up every time her dad punches a hole in the wall. And so for me, seeing and hearing from my patients that connection between very high doses of adversity and both behavioral and health problems forced me. I feel like I had no option but to begin investigating how it is that early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. And that is how I came across the ACE study. And the ACE study, for the 2 of you who didn't raise your hand, is a study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. It was published now 2 decades ago in 1998. And in it, they asked 17,500 adults about their histories of 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. These include physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, or growing up in a household where a parent was mentally ill, substance dependent, incarcerated, where there was parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you'd get a point on your ACE score. And then they did something really amazing. They correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. And what they found was absolutely striking. It was a game changer. 2 things. The first thing that they found was that ACEs are incredibly common. 2/3 of their population had experienced at least one ACE, and 1 in 8 folks had experienced 4 or more ACEs. And one of the things that was really powerful about the study was that it was not done in Bayview Hunters Point or South Central Los Angeles or inner city Chicago. It was done in Kaiser, San Diego. The population was 70% Caucasian, 70% college educated. And that completely debunked the myth that these things only happen in certain zip codes or to certain people, or for what most people feel, this only happened in my family, right? The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between adverse childhood experiences and not just the stuff that you would expect, behavioral problems, mental health problems, increased risk of substance dependence, but the stuff that's not due to bad behavior and failure of will, right? We're talking about heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes. A person with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences has more than double the risk for ischemic heart disease, which is the #1 killer in the United States of America, right? And this is a list right here of the 10 leading causes of death in the US, right? And having 4 or more adverse childhood experiences dramatically, not a little bit, dramatically increases your risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States of America. Why is this important? Why am I talking to you all about the leading causes of death in the US? I'll tell you why. Because everything on that list is expensive, right? We right now spend almost $3 trillion a year on healthcare, 75% of which is for the treatment of chronic disease. I want that money. I'm not joking, because if for an individual who has 4 or more ACEs, if we're talking about double or more the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the US, we need to be spending some of that money on early identification, early intervention, so that we can do prevention instead of waiting until kids get downstream. Because without intervention, what we see is that there can be a 20-year difference in life expectancy for individuals who have 6 or more ACEs. Now, for me, when I found out this information, the first thing, and this is my doctor brain, I wanted to know, how does this work, right? Because when we understand the mechanism, when we understand not only which pathways are disrupted, but how, then we can use that science for prevention and treatment. And I'm just going to give you a quick example from recent medical history, right? Back in the early 80s, when patients started coming in like crazy to the emergency rooms, and they had these, weird rashes called Kaposi sarcoma, right? And doctor said, okay, you know what? I know how to do this. This is a skin cancer. We know how to treat Kaposi sarcoma. I'll refer you to a dermatologic oncologist. And people came in, they had really high rates of tuberculosis, right? I say, oh, tuberculosis, we know how to treat that. I'll write you the prescription for tuberculosis. Here you go. They came in with these rare pneumonias, right? And they're like, oh boy, pneumocystis pneumonia. I haven't seen that in a while, but I'll look it up, right? And they say, okay, I know how to treat pneumocystis pneumonia, and they kept on sending folks out the door. And patients kept on coming back. And they kept on coming back, and they were sicker and sicker and sicker. Because you know why? All those prescriptions for antibiotics and anti-TB medications, they were only treating the surface symptom, right? Which was the disease that we thought we knew, right? We thought we knew the TB and the pneumocystis and the Kaposi sarcoma. But those things didn't touch the root of the problem, because the root of the problem was a virus that was compromising the very immune system, which was HIV/AIDS. And when we understood how to target and treat the root of the problem, then we went from a mean mortality from HIV, which was 6 months. 50% of people were dead 6 months from diagnosis, to where we are today with a standard life expectancy on antiretrovirals being over 50 years. We did that in 30 years, y'all. And that's what we can achieve when we understand the fundamental underlying mechanism. So when it comes to childhood adversity and how it affects children's developing brains and bodies, it has to do, the fundamental mechanism has to do with our body's biological stress response, or our fight or flight response. And it works a little something like this, right? So imagine you're walking in a forest and you see this guy, right? What happens? What happens in our brains and bodies? Immediately, our amygdala sounds the alarm, right? And activates our fight or flight response. So our bodies release stress hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol. And these activate our hearts to beat stronger and faster, right? They raise our blood pressure and our blood sugar. Our airways open up, our pupils dilate, and we are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear, right? Brilliant. But the problem is that if you were to think about it, fighting a bear wouldn't seem like a good idea, would it? Look at him. He's big. He's got teeth. He's got claws. And that's why when we activate the stress response, right, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, actually sends projections to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for executive functioning and impulse control and judgment. And it turns it way, way down, because you don't want judgment getting in the way of survival, right? And instead what it does is it turns up the part of the brain that's responsible, the part of the brain that's called the noradrenergic nucleus of the locus coeruleus, or as I like to call it, the part of the brain responsible for, I don't know karate, but I do know crazy, right? Just think about Philadelphia Eagles fans after the last Super Bowl. Right? And now the other less obvious things that happens when you activate your stress response is that it also activates your immune response. Because if that bear gets his claws into you, you actually want your immune system to be primed, to bring inflammation, to stabilize that wound so that you can live long enough to either beat that bear or get away. It's brilliant. It was evolved over millennia to save our lives from a mortal threat. But the problem is what happens when that bear comes home every night. And this biological process is activated over and over and over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. And these long-term changes in a child's brain structure and function, the development of their immune system, the development of their hormonal systems, and even the way their DNA is read and transcribed is what scientists now understand to be a condition called toxic stress. And the exposure to high doses of early life adversity, right, that is tempered by protective factors, right, safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments. We heard about the 4 C's, and when we're talking about caring and community, those are the things that protect and buffer children from the effects of high doses of adversity. And these things get under our skin and endure in our bodies in ways that can last a lifetime if we do not do the appropriate early identification and intervention. And in fact, the effects of toxic stress are detectable in children as early as infancy. Babies show developmental delay, growth delay, and failure to thrive and sleep disruption. In school-age children, we see an increased risk of asthma, pneumonia, viral infection, atopic disease like allergies, learning difficulties, and behavioral problems. And by the way, the number one medical cause for missed school days in the US is asthma. Having 4 or more ACEs doubles a child's risk of asthma. When we're talking about the impact of early adversity on health and learning and school days, we're not just talking about the behavioral symptomatology, we're also talking about the impact on their health. And in older kids, we begin to see increased risk of obesity, diabetes, chronic complaints such as headache and abdominal pain, dramatically increased risk of teen pregnancy, autoimmune diseases like hyperthyroidism, and changes in pubertal timing. So now that we understand what the heck is going on, that's when I and my team at the Center for Youth Wellness decided to mess around and try to figure out how we're going to interrupt this process, right? Because I think that's why all of us are here. We're all part of trying to be part of a system that figures out how do we give kids the best opportunity for not only a healthy childhood, but a healthy life trajectory. So one of the first things that we did when we found out this information is we went back in my clinical practice and did what we call a chart review. We went back and looked at the medical charts of all of the kids that we had seen in the first 2 years of our clinic. And we tallied up their ACE scores, and then we compared those ACE scores against 2 health outcomes, their risk of being overweight or obese, and their risk of having learning or behavior problems in school. And what we found was that very similar to the original ACE study, our kids in Bayview Hunters Point had 2/3 of them had at least one adverse childhood experience, and 12% had 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. And to be honest, I was a little surprised that it wasn't higher, given Bayview is a rough neighborhood. But then I remembered something interesting, which is that the original ACE study was done among adults, and they asked which of these happened to you before you were 18. In our study, the mean age was 8 years old. And we were doing a chart review. This is just what parents had told us. And by the way, I'm a mandated reporter, right? So if anything, it's an underreport. But what we found was that our kids who had 4 or more ACEs were twice as likely to be overweight or obese than our kids who had 0 ACEs. And I just want to flag that for a second. We're talking about same neighborhood, same food desert, same lack of safe places to play. But if our kids had 4 or more ACEs, they were twice as likely to be overweight or obese as our kids in Bayview who had 0 ACEs. The other piece that we found, even more striking, was that if our kids had 4 or more ACEs, they were 32 times as likely to have learning and behavior problems as our kids with 0 ACEs. And I want to, I'm going to do this thing that he showed me how to do with the laser pointer. Let's see if it works. Is it working? It is not working. That's okay. Let me try it again. Nope. All right. So I will use the good old-fashioned laser pointer. So our black and brown kids, Bayview Hunters Point, if they had 0 ACEs, only 3% of them had learning and behavior problems. Let's see if I can get it. 3% of them. We saw the same dose-response relationship. The more ACEs they had, the worse the outcomes. And for our kids with 4 or more ACEs, more than half of them, 51.2%, had learning and behavior problems in school. And when I saw that statistic, I was so angry because these were the kids who had been told that they were the problem. These were the kids who had been told that they cannot learn when our data was telling us that these problems directly correlated with toxic doses of adversity. Our children are not broken, right? And what was fascinating was when we did the study and I saw, the relative risk and all of this stuff, what I almost missed was the good news, which was for our kids who had 0 ACEs, our black and brown kids in Bayview Hunters Point, if they had 0 ACEs, only 3% of them had learning and behavior problems, right? And the reason this is important and the reason the science is important, I'm gonna bring you all into my little sciencey medical world because I'm a total science nerd, right? But I'm gonna tell you the reason why this is important. This is a graph of the functioning of the prefrontal cortex relative to stress hormones. And you'll see it has this inverted U shape, right? So if you don't have enough stress hormones, you can't pay attention and function. And let me ask you something. What's the #1 treatment for ADHD in the United States of America? Ritalin, stimulants, right? Ritalin, Adderall, Strattera, et cetera, right? And the reason for that is because if you don't have enough stress hormones, right? If you don't have enough stimulants, your prefrontal cortex doesn't work very well. So as you add stimulants, you improve the functioning of the prefrontal cortex, and that is the reason why Ritalin is the #1 treatment for ADHD in the US. But if you've got this same really bad prefrontal cortical functioning, but instead of because you don't have enough stress hormones, you've got way too much stress hormones, what do you think happens when you add Ritalin? Right? Kids don't improve. You may not help, and in some cases, you may even do harm. And that's what I was seeing in my clinical practice. I was seeing kids come in, and they're on Ritalin or Adderall and Strattera, and it doesn't work, so hey, let's add an antipsychotic and put on some Risperdal and some other stuff on top of it, right? In the meantime, no one's getting to the root cause, right, which is the adversity that the child is dealing with in the first place. And for this reason, in our center, right, if a kid comes in with ADHD symptoms, but they have a high ACE score, the treatment is to reduce the dose of adversity and enhance the capacity of the caregivers in the child's life to be a buffer to their stress, right? That is what the science tells us. And in the cases where our kids do need medications to support them, right? Because some kids do. I'm not going to say never use any medications, but in our center, our team actually starts with a non-stimulant medication called guanfacine. It was originally developed as a blood pressure lowering medication, and it turns out they were giving it to vets in the VA, and it dramatically reduced their PTSD symptoms. And the reason is because it regulates the locus coeruleus, the I don't know karate, but I do know crazy part of the brain. And it targets the overstimulation of the locus coeruleus, right? Understanding the science gives us more tools to treat our children differently. So in our center, as a routine part of the medical exam, every single child is screened for adverse childhood experiences as a routine part of their physical. And in order to facilitate that, doing that quickly and efficiently for every single child, we actually don't ask which ACEs your child has experienced, right? Because I don't know if any of you have taken your child to the pediatrician lately, but we got 15 minutes, okay? And in order to be able to do routine ACE screening as part of the regular physical exam, we have, our team developed this screening tool where we list the 10 traditional ACEs in this top box, you'll see up here, and we simply ask parents to put the number in that box, right? And if that number is a 0 versus a 2 versus a 4 versus an 8, I immediately have an indication of that child's risk of having a toxic stress physiology. So if they come into me, they got ADHD symptoms, and that number is a 0, then maybe we're dealing with a straightforward ADHD. But if that number is a 6, then we're dealing with something else, and I have a totally different treatment plan. And I will tell you, I am a woman on a mission, and my goal is for every pediatrician in America to be routinely screening for adverse childhood experiences. It's part of the well child exam because if there's two things that we know, one is that, number one, early detection improves outcomes. That's the one thing the science is unequivocal. The earlier we detect, the better kids do. And number two, safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments are healing for kids. So I'll give a very quick example of what that looks like in the exam room, and then I'll talk about what that looks like in the community. So I had a 3-year-old kid who came in to see me for her regular physical. She had moved from across the country. This was my first time seeing her. She was a little Caucasian girl, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, adorable, beautiful family, the whole thing. Mom's only concern was that her daughter was little. She was itty-bitty. She didn't seem like she was growing normally. And Mom was right. This is her daughter's growth curve, and you'll see it drops below the 3rd percentile here for height, here for weight. And if I were to show you for her head size, her head circumference, you would also see that it dropped below the 3rd percentile. And this little girl met the criteria for failure to thrive. What's the number one treatment for failure to thrive? Nutritional supplementation. And that's what her previous pediatrician had been doing for the past year. And it didn't seem to be working. When we did our routine ACE screen as just part of her regular physical, right? This little girl's ACE score, and at the age of 3 years old, she had an ACE score of 7. And what I explained to her mother was I said, because of what your daughter has experienced, I believe that her body is making more stress hormones than it should. And this is the most likely thing that is interfering with her growth. And so I am going to prescribe for you an intervention for your family called child-parent psychotherapy to help you reduce the dose of adversity that your child is experiencing, and also to give you skills and tools to be a buffer to your child's adversity. Within 6 months, this child was back on the growth curve. This is the difference that understanding routine ACE screening and understanding the underlying biology and the root cause makes. But right now, of the 33,000 pediatricians who are members of the American Academy of Pediatrics, only 4% are screening for adverse childhood experiences. And when I first saw that number, I was outraged. But then I was reading this paper, I was reading really carefully, and then I realized, well, snap, only 11% have even heard of the ACE science, right? And this is why every single one of us has an incredibly important role to play, because we have to get this word out there. We have to make it part of common knowledge so that there's no excuse. This needs to be standard of practice. Every single child deserves early detection. Every single child deserves routine screening so that they can have the best opportunity for health, for learning, for healthy development, right? Because we know early adversity dramatically affects a child's developmental trajectory. And in order to facilitate that, our organization, the Center for Youth Wellness, has created something called the National Pediatric Practice Community on ACEs. Because, Dr. Long and myself, we may have dedicated our lives to this issue, but we know not every pediatrician does. We're not asking everyone to reinvent the wheel. We're not asking everyone to figure out how to do this on their own. We have created a digital platform to allow any pediatrician in the US to sign up, to get access to tools, information, the latest science, and to create a community of learning where folks can surface challenges and obstacles and figure out, hey, I'm doing this, is it working for you? How are you developing these community connections, right? And to be able to build will in their practice, and plus stuff like billing and coding and all that other stuff that we gotta do, right? And so we launched this last year, and we've launched in 6 pilot sites across the US, 6 clinics that are clinical hubs, 5 in California and 1 in New York. In addition, our goal was to get 1,000 pediatricians over 3 years to join this practice community. In the past year, yes, we're just at the year mark. We have over 550 pediatricians that are members of the National Pediatric Practice Community. And more than 2,000 clinicians in 24 countries have downloaded our ACE screening tool. But you all know better than I do that if we think that we are going to solve this problem in the exam room or in the pediatrician's office, we are sorely mistaken. We absolutely need to be engaging with families, with parents, with communities, with schools, with every child-serving institution in our community. So when one of the things that we've done to this end is created something called stresshealth.org to engage parents and caregivers to raise awareness about adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. Because guess what? You know what? When we did our market research, we actually went out and did market research with parents. And we asked them about their kids' exposure to adversity and what they thought the impact of that would be. And do you know what overwhelmingly parents told us? They said, oh, that stuff happened when he was a kid, but he didn't remember it, right? Oh, he was a baby when that happened, so it didn't affect him. There's a myth of childhood amnesia, right? That if things are happening in the household, or, okay, well, there may have been terrible verbal and psychological abuse, but because nobody laid hands on the kid, he should be all right, right? And the goal of stresshealth.org is to raise awareness among parents and families and also give them tools to be able to recognize, number one, how to recognize the signs and symptoms in their kids, but number two, how to manage and support themselves, right? How to practice that self-care, because if we as adults do not have a healthy, well-regulated stress response, then it is going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult for us to be that healthy buffer for the children in our lives. And an incredible example of using this science. So when you all get a copy of my book, when you all get the book, you'll read that, the 6 interventions that we advocate at the Center for Youth Wellness and that we implement are sleep, exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, mental health, and healthy relationships. And a great example of understanding how adversity at the core is the root of the problem and addressing that issue is something that was done by the Center for Wellness and Achievement in Education in San Francisco, where they implemented a school-wide mindfulness program called Quiet Time, right? So it's like this moment of mindfulness. And kids could either practice this, do this mindfulness training and practice that, or they could do just quiet reading or something like that. Well, what do you think they saw? Reduction in school violence, drop in the suspension rate, increased GPA, because you got to get those GPA, increase composite STAR test scores, because everybody wants the test scores, right? A reduction in the African American achievement gap, and I'm going to be honest, my favorite, a decrease in the psychological distress in administrators and teachers over the 4-month period. We can do this, y'all. We can do this. If you are a parent, if you're an educator, if you're an administrator, if you are a doctor, if you are a neighbor, if you were a child or have a child, right? There is a role to play in this movement. Please join us. Our kids depend on it. Thank you. Thank you. And I think that we have a few minutes for questions. Ooh, I get to sit here? All right.
Amazing. I think everybody agrees. Amazing. So I think I'll actually walk around. I don't know if we have mics. So do people have questions? Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. It's just incredible to hear how you're sharing the story of what's happening to our children. I'm Kirsten Russell. I'm from Sarasota, Florida. I work for the Community Foundation of Sarasota. And my question to you is, for children living in public housing, what would be your piece of advice on what if we could do one thing for those children, what would it be?
Ooh, that's.
I mean,
that's
we'll take 5, but one would be a great start.
So there are a couple of things. I think that anytime anybody asks me if there were one thing, I always say universal ACE screening, but I know you mean beyond that. And there was a study that came out that I know you saw, I was gonna send it to you, about the greening of our urban environments and what a difference that makes in child well-being. And there was actually, I think was it a randomized control trial that they did where they saw kids had improved mental health outcomes as a result of the greening of certain areas. And I think that the point is that I can give you an idea or a suggestion, but there is no one thing. Just do the thing in your community. I think that for communities, and oftentimes it may be ask the community what would be the one thing that would be most potent. That was one of the things that we did in Bayview. And engage and empower the community to do what they feel excited about taking ownership of.
I would say that the ability to have housing is critical. What we know from the research that we're doing on social determinants of health is that approximately half of the families that we're seeing within our safety net do not have habitable housing. And when you have a mother who is struggling for food and housing, living in poverty, having ACEs, all those factors compound one another. And families have a right for basic needs. There's no child that should be hungry, and there's no child that should be homeless. And so we really need to advocate for more safe, affordable housing. Yes.
So we talk a lot about what to do in the early part for our younger children, but what do we do for our young adults that are transitioning into adulthood who have scores of 7, 8, 9, and 10?
So one of the most important things that I think for young people is helping them recognize what's going on to begin with, right? So for my adolescents, when I sit in clinic with them, and I was chatting with one of my patients, and we were talking about his ACE score, and I was saying, because of what you've experienced, your body is likely to be making more stress hormones than it should. And he said, "Oh yeah, I get hot quick," right? And One of the things that was so powerful about that was that it allowed him, number one, to recognize that that was actually his body trying to protect him and doing what it was supposed to be doing in trying to protect him, but that it wasn't necessarily serving him in every situation. And it really reduced a lot of the judgment and self-judgment, because for a lot of our young people, when they are quick to anger or when they are having difficulty with impulse control, they hear over and over and over again that there's something wrong with them and that they are bad, right? As opposed to being able to recognize, oh, whoa, oh, that's just my overactive stress response. And there are tools that I can use to be able to manage that. So whether it's downloading a mindfulness app on my phone or making sure that, when I'm recognizing my stress response getting activated, I'll go out and shoot some hoops, because exercise really helps to metabolize stress hormones and release endorphins and other healthy hormones that help to combat that. And so the sleep, exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, mental health, and healthy relationships works for children and adults, but it is most effective in the framework of understanding what the problem is in the first place. Yeah.
Yes, in the back.
A wonderful presentation. Thank you. I'm Charles English, the President CEO for Boys and Girls Club Greater Dallas. We serve 6,500 kids annually, 1,800 kids a day, and majority of those kids are elementary age kids. One particular site of our 18 sites is in a very low-income community, described as poor, underserved. And of this particular elementary school, Dunbar Elementary, we found out almost half of the 300 members in our club there are being raised by grandparents. My question to you, these are individuals on fixed income, may not have access to all the things that they need for their grandchildren, their primary caregiver. What can you do, share with us in terms of how we can engage the grandparents to understand some of the things that you've discovered in terms of various behaviors?
Yeah, so in working with grandparents, I think it's always an interesting situation. And when you have a child that's being raised by a grandparent, it's because something really unfortunate has happened in the generation in between. And so helping grandparents be able to understand how that affects a child's health and development, and to be able to recognize what is the normal developmental consequence or the result of what the child has experienced. So my family's Jamaican, and I was down in Jamaica a couple of years ago talking about ACEs, and we were talking about strategies of engaging the elders. And specifically, in Jamaica, there's a lot of corporal punishments, which is one word for it. And it's really funny because all the elders, they beat their kids, but then the same grannies don't want their kids to beat their grandkids, right? And it's really, we actually thought about a campaign called Spare the Rod and Spare the Child, because it was really around changing attitudes, understanding, and perception among that generation, and helping them to be able to understand that that hitting a child, and particularly I think in communities of color, right? There's a lot of it with the older generation believe that that is part of keeping a child in line, and helping this generation be able to understand and recognize. And then the hard part is making sure that they can have the tools, right? Because a lot of grandparents oftentimes are skeptical of timeouts, but I will have to say I have been really, really impressed by the power of sharing this knowledge about ACEs and toxic stress and how it affects the stress response and how it affects child development and brain development in really helping to get grandparents and sometimes great-grandparents in using a different framework to support the kids that they're raising.
So we have a lot of grandparents that bring their children into our clinic as well, and I think these grandparents are heroes. What they're doing when they're already struggling and being on a fixed income, and many of them have chronic illnesses that they themselves are dealing with. So given that grandparents are heroes in the life of these children, we really have to capitalize on the power of that love, and that these grandparents want the very best from their children. And if you can bring the science to their practical everyday life, it's very powerful. In the back there, yeah.
Good morning. I just want to thank you, Dr. Burke Harris, for your awareness, bringing awareness to the community regarding childhood mental health concerns. My name is Kelly Brown, and I work here in Philadelphia for the William Penn Foundation. And I really appreciate the fact that you mentioned that oftentimes infant toddlers, there's not a lot of attention brought to that population because they're not able to express what their needs are. Oftentimes, the parents are not aware that things that have happened in infant and toddlerhood do affect children drastically. So I wondered, as we're working in Philadelphia to increase the awareness of infant toddler mental health needs through technical assistance and training, if there are suggestions that communities should adopt with regard to how to support our families with infant toddler mental health needs.
In our clinic, in our multidisciplinary program, the intervention that we use for really young kids, and there are a number of them, but the one that we use primarily is called child-parent psychotherapy. It was developed by Dr. Alicia Lieberman at UCSF, and it's a dyadic therapy, so it's both with parent and child at the same time. And I think recognizing that that two-generation nature of the work, I think for most of us when we're thinking about infant toddler mental health, we immediately recognize that it has to be at least a two-generation and if not multiple generation intervention to be able to support families and really keeping, and in that intervention they hold the relationship as the central focus of the work that they're doing. And I've seen that intervention be incredibly, incredibly effective. That was the intervention that we used at the child that I highlighted that wasn't growing well. And if you get the opportunity to read my book, I talk more about child-parent psychotherapy as an intervention in the book.
Thank you both for being here, both of you truly, truly doing life-changing work. My question has to do with the 11% with the pediatricians, as far as ACEs. What is some of the history behind that? Why is it so low? Is it something that ACEs just kind of has to go out on the road and sell itself a little more? What is the reasoning? Because I'm surprised but not surprised, just for the fact, both professionally and personally, I have a young daughter, and it never ceases to amaze me when the lack of awareness with pediatricians, but that's more around early literacy and early ed total. So I'm not surprised, but just it's still shocking. And if you have any knowledge on why it is so low.
Yeah, well, I'll say that I think that when I talked to Vince Felitti, who is one of the principal investigators on the ACE study, I think there are many of us who, and he said he had this idea that he was gonna, he published the study and put the information out there, and he thought it just made so much common sense that people would just take it and run with it. And that's not what happens. What happens is we need advocates, and that's why we are all here. We can have the best science in the world, But if we do not have advocates who are insisting that it is on the agenda, that it gets into our policies, that we are changing our practices, right? Then it's just in a journal somewhere. When my team was looking at the research to pull together all the health conditions associated with childhood adversity, we reviewed 16,000 research papers. 16,000. That's nuts. At this point, this is not like, it's not debatable, it's not a question, and yet it still isn't part of practice. And part of the reason, maybe if we found a great way to make a ton of money off of ACE screening, right, then it would be, there'd be these economic drivers behind it, right? And I think that's one of the big challenges. But that is why when we looked at how do these movements move forward, it's either there's a company behind it that's going to make money off of it, and so they're pushing it forward, or there are advocates and champions who stand up and say, I insist that we make this part of routine practice.
And I just want to add that herein lies the opportunity. And there are many in this room that have stood up and said, we will make this change. And there are many philanthropists in the room that are saying, we are investing in early childhood. We are investing in practice change to affect evidence-based policy to improve outcomes for our kids. We had a couple of sessions on this big bet that a collective of funders is really investing in. And we really need to partner with you in order to help make that change. I'm going to go all the way in the back. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Good morning. Thank you for your work. My name is Don Pipkins. I'm from the Oakland Housing Authority, but I was born and raised in San Francisco Bayview area. So thank you so much for what you're doing for our children. My question is that I wanted to find out, I guess, is as a advocate for change with the Oakland Housing Authority, how do we go about trying to reach the preteen population, which seems to be the hardest to reach? They're seen as maybe being disruptive because they have this trauma, and it's hard to be able to deal with them. I think for the younger generation, or for 5-year-olds, we can do mindful messaging with them, and I think we're practicing that with our groups. But for that older population, it's a little bit difficult trying to reach them. And they're labeled as being ADHD or having some type of hyperactivity to where, they can't really, they're just labeled, essentially. And so we just want to I want to try to figure out, because I'm working with them in youth programming, how do we reach them? What are some methods that we can use to be able to try to get them into mindfulness? Because they're not there. So just trying to see what kind of advice you had to give.
So I can tell, I gather from your question that you're thinking that your thrust is more around in community programming. How do you reach kids? Because I can tell you clinically what we do in our center. Actually, just that kind of preteen population is a really wonderful population that we engage with something called biofeedback. And it's actually a really awesome time to do biofeedback, because it's like the perfect time to do biofeedback, which is, we hook them up to all of these electrodes, and they have a computer screen, and they control a video game with essentially with their stress response system. Like, they have to do these calming techniques, these breathing techniques, and these relaxation techniques, and it gets the video game to go, right? And preteen kids are the perfect ones to do it, because if you're under 6, you're a little too young, and if you're older, you think more about it. So there are some really wonderful interventions that we do with that age group. But in terms of the engagement, I would say it's a little different because I'm in the doctor's office, so we're screening them and that we're doing the intervention. But I think it's really, we always start with meeting families where they are, meeting the kids where they are, and starting by working on what's the biggest challenge for them, right? So what are they saying that they want to address or work on? And being able to, I think for a lot of those kids, it's just being able to be a safe space for them and recognize and start having these open conversations about how adversity can feel, like stress and trauma can feel in our bodies, right? And just to begin to kind of create this culture and this community of recognizing what's going on and being able to model some of that in terms of self-awareness and self-care, and then also being that safe space that kids, you know, I think one of the things that I feel most proud of is that, you know, since I finished my residency in 2005, I've been working in Bayview Hunters Point, and I have not gone anywhere, right? We're still here. We're the safe space. We'll be here for the long haul, and I think that's really important.
So I'm going to wrap up this session, and we all are now recognizing that trauma is the public health crises of our time, and we are the ones that we're waiting for to make the change. I hope all of the energy and engagement with this conversation you guys bring back to your own organizations, and we can do this. So thank you very much.
Please join us in thanking once again Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris and Dr. Dana Long.
Is Ralph coming up?
Please welcome to the stage Siobhan Reardon, President and Director of the Free Library of Philadelphia.
So I have to apologize to all of you. I thought my opening remarks were rather pithy, don't you think, being I wasn't here? I apologize for that, but I get to close out this absolutely remarkable session with Drs. Burke-Harris and Long. Give them another round of applause. They are fantastic. So we're going to move on to the institutes, and I'm going to bring up Rhonda to come up and bring that in. But before we close out, I couldn't agree with the doctors more in that the trauma-informed care is the thing that we need to be focusing on going forward. And it is something that even the staff of the Free Library of Philadelphia have been begging for. So we have entered a whole new world of what it takes to be with our children nowadays. Okay, Rhonda, thanks.
First, I want to welcome everyone to the Institutes. That was a great way to start. Dr. Burke-Harris's book will be for sale outside the ballroom, and while she would love to sign each and every one of your books, her time will not allow her to do so. So therefore, we have devised what we think is the fairest way to handle this. Under 50 chairs, and in the ballroom, it's going to be under your cushion. There is a golden ticket that will give you the opportunity to get your book signed by Dr. Burke-Harris. Now, wait a minute. Don't worry if you're in the overflow room. The golden tickets are evenly divided between both rooms. Enjoy the Institutes and use your app.